The ship had been dying for a very long time. Yuna opened her eyes slowly, feeling the cold bite into her bones as the cryogenic pod released her. The lid slid open with a grinding sound that hurt her ears. She lay still for a moment, staring at the dark ceiling above her. The lights that once glowed bright white now flickered a weak yellow. Some did not work at all, Dawn. She pulled herself up and swung her legs over the side of the pod. Her muscles screamed in pain. They always did after a long sleep. She had been doing this for so long now that she had lost count of the years. 10 years of sleep, then a few days awake to check on the ship and the survivors. Then back to sleep again. Over and over. For centuries, the medical bay was cold and silent. Yuna's breath came out as white mist. She wrapped her thin arms around herself and walked slowly toward the control panel. Her pale blue skin looked almost gray in the weak light. She was thin. Too thin. The nutrient feeds in the pods were failing like everything else. She pressed her hand against the panel and waited. The screen flickered to life, showing numbers and symbols that made her heart sink. 2 hearts, both beating too fast. Both filled with dread. 17 more pods had failed since her last awakening. Yuna stood very still. She did not cry. She had cried so many times before that she thought she had no tears left. But the pain was still there, sitting heavy in her chest like a stone. She made herself walk through the ship. Her bare feet made soft sounds against the metal floor. The halls were empty. They had always been empty for as long as she could remember being awake. But once, long ago, these halls had been filled with voices. Children running. Parents calling after them. Scientists discussing their work. Elders telling stories of the homeworld. The homeworld. Yuna could barely remember it now. She had been young when they left. Just a child herself. Her mother had held her hand as they boarded the Pale Wanderer, promising that they would find a new home. A better home. A safe home. That was over 3,000 years ago. The war had come without warning. The Veleth were not warriors. They were explorers and teachers and healers. When the enemy came, they did not know how to fight back. Entire worlds burned. Billions died. The survivors scattered across the stars, running in every direction, hoping that somewhere out there was safety. The Pale Wanderer was one of many colony ships that fled. It carried 12,000 Veleth, along with seeds and animals and all the knowledge they could save. They were supposed to find a new planet and start again, but the journey was long. Too long. The ship was damaged in an attack during the escape. The engines failed after just 200 years. The communications array broke down. The AI that ran the ship went silent and never spoke again, and so they drifted. Yuna walked into the children's section of the cryogenic bay and stopped. All the pods were dark. All of them. She had checked them 10 years ago, and some had still been working. Some children had still been alive, frozen in time, waiting for a future that would never come. Now they were gone. She knelt down beside one of the pods and pressed her forehead against the cold glass. Inside was a small figure, a little girl with pale blue skin and closed eyes. She looked peaceful, like she was only sleeping. But Yuna knew better. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I am so sorry." She stayed there for a long time. The cold seeped into her knees, but she did not move. There was nowhere to go. Nothing to do. She was the last one awake. She was the last one who could still walk through these halls and remember what they had lost. Finally, she stood up and continued her walk. She had to check the other sections. She had to see how many were left. The numbers were not good. Of the 12,000 who had started this journey, only 47 remained. And of those 47, 31 were in critical condition. Their pods were failing slowly, and Yuna had no way to fix them. She had tried. For centuries, she had tried. But she was a medical officer, not an engineer. The The tool she needed did not exist on this ship anymore. She made her way to the observation deck. It was her favorite place on the ship, though she could not say why. Perhaps because it was the only place where she could see outside. The rest of the ship had no windows. It was just metal and darkness, and the hum of machines that were slowly dying. The observation deck had a large window that stretched across the entire wall. Una stood before it and looked out at the stars. They were so far away, so cold and distant. She had been looking at them for 3,000 years, and they never seemed to get any closer. There was no planet out there waiting for them, no rescue ship coming to save them. The distress beacon had been sending its signal into the void since the engines failed, but no one had ever answered. Una did not know if anyone was even listening. She sat down on the floor, her back against the wall, and pulled her knees to her chest. The cold was getting worse. The heating systems were failing too. Soon, the whole ship would be as cold as space itself. She thought about the others. The 47 still alive, frozen in their pods, trusting her to keep them safe. She thought about all the ones she had already lost. The thousands who had died over the centuries, their pods failing one by one. She thought about her mother, who had died just 50 years into the journey, taken by a sickness the medical systems could not cure. She thought about giving up, thought it would be easy. She could simply not go back to her pod. She could sit here and let the cold take her. It would be peaceful, quiet. She would finally rest, but something inside her refused. Some small spark that had kept her going for 3,000 years. She did not know what it was. Hope? Duty? Stubbornness? It did not matter. It was there, and it would not let her stop. She stood up and turned to leave the observation deck. That was when the sensors beeped. Una froze. She had not heard that sound in centuries. The sensors were old and broken, like everything else on this ship. They barely worked anymore, but they were beeping now. She ran to the control panel near the window and pressed her hand against it. The screen flickered, struggled, and then showed her something that made her heart stop. A ship. There was a ship out there, moving toward them. Una stared at the screen. Her hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. This had to be a mistake. The sensors were broken. They were showing her ghosts, echoes, nothing real. But the ship kept coming. It was small, much smaller than the Pale Wanderer. It moved with purpose, like it knew exactly where it was going. Like it had heard their call and was coming to answer. Una pressed her hand against the window, leaving a pale print on the cold glass. She watched the ship approach, and for the first time in centuries, she felt something she had forgotten existed. Hope. Someone had heard them. Someone was coming. The strange ship circled the Pale Wanderer like a curious animal studying its prey. Una watched it from the observation deck, her eyes never leaving the small vessel as it moved slowly around her dying ship. It had been 3 days since she first saw it on the sensors. 3 days of waiting and watching and hoping and fearing. She had tried to contact them. The communication systems on the Pale Wanderer were ancient and damaged, but she had managed to send a few weak signals. Static was all she received in return. Either they could not understand her, or they chose not to respond. The ship was unlike anything in the Velith records. Una had spent hours searching through the old databases, looking for any match. She found nothing. The vessel was angular and plain, built for function rather than beauty. Strange symbols covered its hull, letters and numbers in a language she had never seen. It was small compared to the Pale Wanderer, barely large enough to hold a handful of crew members, but it moved with confidence. It knew what it was doing. On the first day, Una had felt only hope. Someone had come. Someone had finally heard their call after 3,000 years of silence. On the second day, hope began to mix with fear. She remembered the stories her mother had told her. Not all who wandered the stars were kind. Some species hunted others. Some took slaves. The war that had destroyed the Velith homeworld had been started by those who saw her people as weak and easy to conquer. What if these strangers were the same? On the third day, Una made a decision. She found the old ceremonial blade that had belonged to her grandfather. It was not much of a weapon, just a curved piece of metal with a worn handle. It had been used for rituals, not fighting. But it was all she had. She also put on the formal robes of her position. If she was going to face these strangers, she would do so with dignity. She was the last functioning officer on this ship. She represented her people. On the fourth day, something changed. Una was in the medical bay, checking on the pods again, when she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. A deep, echoing clang. Then another, and another. Something was attaching to the hull. She grabbed her blade and ran through the corridors. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel them in her throat. The ship's internal sensors were mostly dead, but she had memorized every part of this vessel. She knew exactly where the sound was coming from. Airlock 7. It was on the lower deck near the cargo holds. Una reached it just as the outer door finished its cycle. A light above the airlock turned from red to yellow. Someone was in the space between the outer and inner doors. Someone was waiting to come in. Una stood before the inner door, her blade raised in front of her with both hands. She tried to control her breathing. She tried to stop her hands from shaking. She failed at both. The inner door hissed and began to slide open. A figure stood in the airlock, wearing a bulky suit that covered its entire body. The helmet hid its face. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Una stared at the stranger, and the stranger stared back. Then, slowly, the figure reached up and removed its helmet. Una had seen many species in the old databases. The galaxy was vast and filled with countless forms of life. But she had never seen anything like this creature before. It had soft skin, much softer than her own. The color was warm, like sand touched by sunlight. Its hair was dark and short, slightly messy from the helmet. Two eyes looked at her, round and dark, filled with something she could not name. It was shorter than her, but broader in the shoulders. Its body radiated heat like a small furnace, pushing back the cold air of the ship. It spoke. The words were incomprehensible. The sounds were strange, rising and falling in patterns Una had never heard. But the tone was clear. The creature was not threatening her. It was not demanding anything. It was asking a question. Una lowered her blade slightly. The creature did not move forward. It stayed in the airlock, giving her space, respecting her territory. One of its hands was raised, palm open and facing her. The other hand held nothing at all. It spoke again, the same gentle tone, the same questioning sound. Una did not understand the words, but she understood the meaning. She had heard that tone before, long ago, when she was just a child and her mother had found her crying in the corner of their cabin. The stranger was asking if she was okay. Tears filled Una's eyes. She blinked them away quickly, embarrassed by her own weakness. She was an officer. She was supposed to be strong. The stranger took a small step back, giving her even more space. It reached slowly into a pocket on its suit and pulled out a small device. It held the device up and spoke into it. A light blinked on the top. Then a voice came from the device, speaking in broken but understandable Velith. "We hear call. We come help." Una's blade clattered to the floor. She did not remember dropping it. She stood there, frozen, staring at this strange creature that had crossed the void to answer a signal that had been screaming into the darkness for 3,000 years. "Who are you?" she managed to ask. Her voice was rough and weak. She had not spoken aloud in decades. The stranger spoke into its device again. The translation came back a moment later. "Human. I am human. Name is Dalian. Human. Yuna had never heard that word before. She searched her memory, trying to find it in the old records, but there was nothing. This species was unknown to the Velith. Perhaps they were new to space travel. Perhaps they came from a region her people had never explored. It did not matter. What mattered was that they had come. "I am Yuna," she said slowly, clearly, hoping the device could understand her. "Medical officer of the Pale Wanderer. There are survivors. 47. Many are dying." Do-hyun listened to the translation. His face changed, becoming serious and focused. He spoke into the device again, this time with urgency. "How many dying? How much time?" 31 in critical condition. "The pods are failing. I do not know how much time we have. Days. Maybe hours." Dawn nodded. He pulled another device from his suit and spoke into it rapidly in his own language. Yuna could not understand what he was saying, but she recognized the tone. He was calling for help. When he finished, he looked at her again. The device in his hand blinked. "More ships coming. Medical team. Engineers. We will save them. All of them." Yuna felt her legs give out beneath her. She would have fallen, but Do-hyun moved forward quickly and caught her. His hands were warm, so warm, and his grip was strong but gentle. "Easy," the device translated. "Easy. You are safe now. We are here." Yuna looked up at this stranger, this human who had appeared from nowhere to answer a call that no one else had heard. She searched his face for lies, for hidden intentions, for anything that would tell her this was a trick. She found only kindness. "Why?" She whispered. "Why did you come?" "We have nothing. We are no one." Do-hyun helped her stand. He kept one hand on her arm, steady and warm. He spoke, and the device translated. "You called. We answered. That is enough." Yuna did not understand, but she also did not care. For the first time in 3,000 years, she was not alone. The humans had come. The first human ship was only the beginning. Within 6 hours, more vessels arrived. Yuna stood on the observation deck and watched them emerge from the darkness like stars being born. Medical frigates with bright red symbols on their hulls. Engineering vessels carrying tools and equipment. Supply ships loaded with food and medicine and things Yuna had not seen in centuries. They moved with purpose and speed, attaching themselves to the Pale Wanderer like children gathering around a dying grandmother. Airlocks connected. Doors opened. And the humans poured in. Yuna had never seen so much activity. The halls that had been silent for 3,000 years were suddenly filled with voices, footsteps, and the hum of machines. The humans worked without rest, moving through the ship in teams, assessing damage, checking systems, and most importantly, saving lives. Do-hyun stayed by her side through most of it. He had a small device attached to his ear now, a better translator that turned his words into Velith almost instantly. He explained what was happening as they walked together through the ship. "The medical team is checking all the pods," he said. "They will stabilize the ones in critical condition first. Our doctors have never treated Velith before, but they are learning fast. Your biology is different from ours, but not too different." Yuna nodded, but she struggled to believe what she was seeing. Engineers were already working on the power systems, running cables from the human ships to feed energy into the Pale Wanderer. Lights that had been dark for centuries flickered back to life. The air grew warmer as heating units began to function again. "How?" she asked quietly. "How can you do all this? We are strangers. We are nothing to you." Do-hyun looked at her with those soft, dark eyes. "You are people," he said simply. "That is enough." They reached the medical bay, and Yuna stopped at the door. Inside, human doctors in white suits were moving between the pods. checking readings, adjusting settings, injecting medicines into the failing systems. A young woman with short black hair was bent over one of the child pods, her face tight with concentration. "That is Minji," Do-hyun said. "She is our best pediatric doctor. She has been working on the children's pods since she arrived." Yuna watched Minji work. The human doctor's hands moved with skill and care, adjusting something inside the pod. A moment later, a light on the pod changed from red to yellow, then to green. Yuna's breath caught in her throat. Green meant stable. Green meant alive. "She saved her," Yuna whispered. "She saved that child. She will save many more before the night is over," Do-hyun said. They continued walking. Everywhere Yuna looked, she saw humans doing the impossible. A team of engineers had opened up the main engine housing and were studying the ancient technology with fascinated eyes. One of them, a tall man named Taiwu, was already drawing up plans to install a temporary drive from one of the human ships. "It will not be as fast as your original engines," Taiwu explained through his translator, "but it will be enough to move you. We can take you somewhere safe." "Safe?" Yuna repeated the word like it was foreign. She had not felt safe in so long that she had forgotten what it meant. "There is a colony world," Do-hyun said. "It belongs to humanity, but we have welcomed other species before. There is room. There is food. There is peace." Yuna did not know what to say. She had dreamed of finding a new homeworld for her people for her entire life. Now, after everything they had lost, after 3,000 years of drifting, this stranger was offering it to her. "Why do you do this?" she asked again. She could not help herself. She needed to understand. "Other species have found us before. They scanned our ship. They saw that we had nothing of value. And they left. Every single time, they left." Do-hyun was quiet for a moment. They stood in the corridor, surrounded by the sounds of repair work and medical equipment. Finally, he spoke. "Humans are young," he said. "We have only been in space for a few hundred years. We are not powerful. We have no great empire. Many species look at us and see nothing special." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But we remember what it was like to be alone. We remember looking up at the stars and wondering if anyone was out there. We remember sending signals into the darkness and hoping for an answer." He looked at Yuna, and she saw something deep in his eyes. Something that felt familiar. "Your signal was weak and old. Most crews would have ignored it. My captain almost did. But I asked her to investigate. I told her that someone might still be alive out there. Someone might still be hoping. And she listened?" Do-hyun smiled. "Humans are strange that way. We believe in hope even when it makes no sense. We believe that every knock deserves an answer." The next 3 weeks were the busiest of Yuna's life. The humans worked without stopping, rotating in shifts so that there was always someone awake. Always someone fixing or healing or building. They ate strange food that smelled both wonderful and terrible. They laughed and argued and sang songs in their language. They treated each other with rough affection, slapping backs and making jokes even during the hardest moments. And they treated the Velith with endless kindness. When an elderly Velith man was finally awakened from his pod, confused and frightened, a human nurse named Junho sat with him for hours, holding his hand and speaking softly until the old man felt safe. When a young Velith mother woke to find that her child had survived, Minji was the one who brought them together, watching with wet eyes as mother and daughter embraced. Not all the stories had happy endings. 8 of the 47 could not be saved. Their pods had failed too long ago, their bodies kept frozen only by the cold of space. They were gone before the humans ever arrived. The human captain, a woman named Sujin, called for a ceremony. The Velith dead were placed in simple containers and released into space with gentle care. The humans stood in silence alongside the Velas survivors, heads bowed. As the containers drifted away toward the stars, Una stood at the front, watching the containers grow smaller and smaller until they disappeared. "They do not have to do this," an elderly Veleth man whispered beside her. "We have no burial rites that include outsiders." Sujin must have heard him, because she spoke without turning her head. "They were people," she said quietly. "That is enough reason to honor them." After the ceremony, the surviving Veleth were given a choice. They could travel to the human colony world and start a new life there, or they could stay with the frontier corps and search for other Veleth survivors, who might still be scattered across the galaxy. Most chose the colony. They were old and tired. They had been drifting for so long that all they wanted was solid ground beneath their feet. They wanted to rest, but Una had a different choice in mind. She found Sujin in the captain's quarters and stood before her with her back straight and her head high. "I wish to stay with the frontier corps," Una said. "I wish to do what you do, to answer the calls that no one else answers." Sujin studied her for a long moment. The human captain was older than most of her crew, with gray streaks in her black hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of many hard years. "Our work is dangerous," Sujin said. "We spend years in the void. We see things that would break most people." "I have spent 3,000 years in the void," Una replied. "I have lost everyone I ever loved. I have watched my people die one by one while I stood helpless. I do not fear your dangers. Then what do you fear?" Una thought about the question. She remembered standing alone on the observation deck, watching the stars and feeling the weight of infinite silence pressing down on her. "I fear being alone again," she said honestly. "With you I would not be." Sujin smiled. It was a small smile, tired but warm. She reached out and placed her hand on Una's shoulder. "Welcome aboard," she said. "Welcome to the family." Una learned what it meant to be human by watching them love. She had expected military discipline. She had expected cold efficiency. The Veleth had old records of other spacefaring species, and most of them operated their ships like machines. Every crew member was apart, doing their task without question, without personality. The humans were nothing like that. On her first morning aboard the Frontier Corps vessel Steady Hand, Una woke to the sound of singing. She followed the noise to the mess hall and found the engineering team gathered around a table, celebrating a birthday. The chief engineer, a round-faced man named Byung-ho, sat in the center with a small cake in front of him. His crew sang a strange song in their language while he pretended to be embarrassed. When they finished, Byung-ho looked up and saw Una standing in the doorway. "Come in," he called, waving her over. "Have some cake." "It is terrible, but that is part of the tradition." Una approached slowly, unsure of what to do. A young woman named Yoonji cut a small piece and handed it to her. "First time having human food?" Yoonji asked with a grin. "Yes," Una admitted. She looked at the cake, a soft brown thing covered in white cream. "Just take a small bite," Do-hyun said from across the table. He was there too, drinking something hot and steaming from a cup. "If you do not like it, no one will be offended." Una took a bite. The sweetness exploded on her tongue, unlike anything she had ever tasted. Her eyes went wide. "This is terrible?" she asked. "How can this be terrible?" The crew burst into laughter. Even Byung-ho, whose cake was being insulted, laughed until tears ran down his cheeks. "She has good taste," someone shouted. "Better than all of you." Byung-ho agreed. From that day forward, Una was no longer a guest. She was crew. The months that followed were the hardest and the best of her long life. She trained alongside the humans, learning their medical techniques and their rescue procedures. She studied their history through books and recordings, trying to understand where they had come from. What she learned surprised her. humanity was a young species. They had only discovered space travel a few centuries ago. Before that, they had been trapped on a single planet, fighting wars among themselves, struggling to survive. They had almost destroyed themselves many times, but they had also built. They had created art and music and literature. They had developed science and medicine. They had looked up at the stars and dreamed of what might be out there. And when they finally reached space, they had carried those dreams with them. "We are not a special species," Do-hyun told her one evening. They were sitting together on the observation deck of the Steady Hand, watching the stars drift by. "Other species have better technology, stronger ships, greater numbers. By most measures, we are unremarkable. Then how have you survived?" Yuna asked. Do-hyun thought about this for a long moment. "We help each other," he said finally. "That is the only thing that has ever saved us. When times are hard, humans come together. When someone is in trouble, others reach out. It is not always perfect. We fail sometimes. We are selfish sometimes. But in the end, we keep trying. And you extend this helping to other species as well? Why would we not? Suffering is suffering. It does not matter if the one suffering has blue skin or green blood or 10 legs. They are still suffering. They still need help." Yuna considered this. In her experience, most species looked after their own kind first. Resources were limited. Survival was difficult. Helping strangers was a luxury that few could afford. But the humans had made it a mission. She saw this firsthand as the Steady Hand traveled through the deep black. They answered distress calls from species Yuna had never heard of. They rescued a cargo ship full of frightened Velith merchants whose engines had failed. They brought medical supplies to a station where a plague was killing hundreds. Each time, the humans asked for nothing in return. "This is inefficient," a diplomat from another species complained during a supply transfer. His name was something unpronounceable, and he looked at Yuna with barely hidden contempt. "You waste resources on species that contribute nothing to your economy. What do you gain from this?" Before Yuna could respond, Do-hyun stepped forward. "We sleep better at night," he said simply. The diplomat stared at him, confused. "That is not a practical answer." "Maybe not," Do-hyun agreed. "But it is an honest one." The diplomat left with his supplies, still shaking his head. Yuna watched him go, then turned to Do-hyun. "You have made an enemy," she said. "We have made many enemies," Do-hyun replied with a shrug. "But we have made more friends. That is what matters in the end." Yuna thought about this as the months turned into years. She watched the humans form bonds with species across the galaxy. Former enemies became allies. Former strangers became family. The Steady Hand was a strange ship, crewed by humans and Velith, and half a dozen other species who had been saved and chosen to stay. They called themselves the Answerers now. It had started as a joke among the crew, but the name had spread. Other species began to recognize them. When the Steady Hand appeared, people knew that help had arrived. Yuna found herself changing too. The weight that had pressed down on her for 3,000 years began to lift. She smiled more. She laughed more. She sang human songs badly but enthusiastically. Much to the delight of the crew, she also found herself spending more time with Do-hyun. He was patient with her questions, never making her feel foolish for not understanding human customs. He taught her to play their games and told her stories about his home planet. In return, she shared her own stories, memories of the Velith homeworld that she had kept locked inside for so long. "You must miss it," he said one night. "Your homeworld." "I do," Yuna admitted. "But missing is all I can do. The homeworld is gone. My people are scattered. The only thing left is to keep moving forward." Do-hyun reached out and took her hand. His fingers were warm against her cold skin. "You are not alone," he said. "Not anymore." Yuna looked at him, at this strange creature from a young species, and felt something bloom in her chest. It was not the love she had known before, the love of family and friends who were now long dead. It was something new, something gentle and warm. Hope, she realized. She was feeling hope again, and this time, she believed it would last. 1 year after her rescue, Yuna received a message. The Veloth survivors who had gone to the human colony world wanted to share their progress. They sent images of new homes being built, of children playing in green fields, of elders teaching the old ways to a new generation. The message ended with a simple line: "We are alive because of you. Because you kept the beacon running. Because you never gave up." Yuna read the message 3 times, tears streaming down her face. That evening, she found Sujin in the captain's quarters. "I am ready," Yuna said. "Ready for what?" Sujin asked. "To command my own ship. To lead my own crew. To answer the calls that no one else answers." Sujin studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I have been wondering when you would ask," the captain said. "We have a vessel waiting for you. The second chance. It is not much, but it is yours." Yuna felt her heart swell with pride. "I will not disappoint you," she promised. Sujin smiled and placed her hand on Yuna's shoulder. "I know you will not. Now go. The void is full of forgotten voices. Someone needs to answer them." 10 years had passed since Yuna first opened her eyes to the sound of a dying ship. She stood now on the bridge of the second chance, watching the stars through the main viewport. The ship hummed with life around her, its systems running smoothly, its crew moving with purpose. It was smaller than the Pale Wanderer had been, but it was alive. It was home. Her crew was a strange mix. There were humans, of course. Do-Hoon was her second in command, his hair now streaked with gray, his face lined with experience. There was Minji, the doctor who had saved so many Veloth children, now serving as the ship's chief medical officer. There was Junho, the gentle nurse, and Byung-ho, the engineer who still insisted on celebrating every birthday with terrible cake. But there were also Veloth. The descendants of the Pale Wanderer had found their place among the answerers. Young Veloth who had grown up on the colony world, hearing stories of the humans who saved their ancestors. They had come to join the mission, to carry on the work that had given them a second chance. And there were others. Species from across the galaxy who had been saved and chosen to save in return. The second chance was a floating example of what was possible when people chose kindness over fear. "Captain," the navigator called from her station. "We are receiving a distress signal." Yuna turned. "What do we have?" The navigator, a young Veloth woman named Bora, studied her screen with focused eyes. "It is old, Captain. Very old. The signal has been broadcasting for over 800 years. Species identification? Unknown. The language is not in our databases. But the pattern matches standard distress frequencies. Someone is asking for help. 800 years." Yuna remembered what it felt like to broadcast into the void for centuries, hoping against hope that someone would hear. "Set a course," she ordered. Bora hesitated. "Captain, a signal that old usually leads to nothing. Debris fields. Empty ships. The chances of survivors are—" "I know what the chances are," Yuna said quietly. She walked to the main viewport and looked out at the distant stars. "I also know that someone once came for me when the chances were just as small. They did not calculate odds. They did not measure efficiency. They simply came." She turned back to face her crew. "That is what we do. That is who we are. We answer, always." Bora nodded slowly, and a small smile crossed her face. "Course plotted, Captain. We will arrive in 16 hours. Good. Alert the medical team. Prepare the engineers. We do not know what we will find, but we will be ready for anything. The ship jumped to faster than light travel, and the stars stretched into lines of light. Do-hyun joined Yuna at the viewport. He stood beside her in comfortable silence, watching the universe blur around them. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking about ripples," Yuna said. "When the humans saved the Pale Wanderer, they created a ripple. That ripple reached the Velas survivors, who built new lives and raised children who now serve on this ship. It reached me, and I became captain of a rescue vessel. And now we are creating our own ripples, reaching out to species we have never met, offering help to those who have been forgotten. That is a lot of ripples. It started with one." Yuna turned to look at him. "It started with you, Do-hyun. You were the one who insisted on investigating our signal. You were the one who knocked on our door." Do-hyun smiled. The same warm smile she had come to love over the years. "Someone had to," he said. 16 hours later. They found the ship. It was ancient, even older than the Pale Wanderer had been. The hull was scarred and pitted, covered in strange symbols that no one recognized. It drifted in the darkness like a ghost, its engines cold, its lights dim, but not all the lights were dark. "Life signs," Minji reported from her station. "Faint, but present. Cryogenic pods, similar to what the Velith used. I am detecting 17 signatures." 17, Yuna repeated. She thought of her own ship, of the 47 survivors who had dwindled from 12,000. She thought of the 8 who had been lost before the humans arrived. Can we reach them in time? Unknown, Minji admitted. The pods are failing. Some may already be beyond saving. Then we do not waste time. Yuna turned to her crew. Engineering team, prepare to board. Medical team, stand by. Everyone else, make ready. We have work to do. The boarding was difficult. The alien ship's systems were incompatible with their own, and the airlocks required creative solutions. But the crew of the Second Chance had done this many times before. Within an hour, they were inside. Yuna was the first to enter the cryogenic bay. It was cold and dark, lit only by the flickering glow of failing pods. The survivors inside were unlike any species she had seen. They were tall and thin, with skin that shimmered like oil on water. Their eyes, closed in frozen sleep, were large and set wide on their faces. The Morvith, another casualty of the ancient war that had scattered the Velith. Yuna walked slowly through the bay, checking each pod. Some were completely dark, their occupants long gone. Others still blinked with faint light, struggling to keep their passengers alive. Can we save them? She asked Minji, who was already scanning the pods. Some of them, Minji said carefully. Their biology is very different from ours. But I have learned a lot in 10 years. I can stabilize them. I can give them a chance. Then give them a chance. The work took days. The engineers rerouted power from the Second Chance to the dying vessel. The medical team worked without rest, adapting their techniques to a species they had never treated before. Food and water were rationed to make sure there was enough for the new survivors of the 17 Morvith. 11 were saved. 6 had been lost to time, their pods failing years or centuries before the Second Chance arrived. But 11 were alive. 11 beings who had been frozen and forgotten for 800 years, waiting for someone to answer their call. When the first Morvith opened her eyes, Yuna was there. The alien woman looked up at her with wide, frightened eyes. She tried to speak, but her voice was weak, a language unknown. Yuna reached out and took her hand. The Morvith's skin was cool and smooth, but there was warmth beneath it. Life. You are safe, Yuna said softly. She knew the words would not be understood, but she hoped the meaning would be. The Morvith woman stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, she squeezed Yuna's hand. Understanding crossed between them. Two strangers from different worlds, connected by the simple truth that one had reached out and the other had answered. In the weeks that followed, translators were developed. The Morvith learned about the second chance and its mission. They learned about the humans who had started it all, and the Voleth who had joined them. They learned about the galaxy that had forgotten them, and the people who had refused to forget. The eldest Morvith, a scholar named Seho, asked to speak with Yuna privately. Why? He asked. It was the same question Yuna had asked Oyun so many years ago. We have nothing to offer. Our technology is ancient. Our homeworld is dust. We are ghosts of a dead civilization. Yuna smiled. A human once told me something that I did not understand at first. He said that humans answer knocks because someone should have answered a long time ago. I did not know what he meant. But now I do. She leaned forward. The galaxy is vast and cold and full of darkness. Beings drift through it, sending signals that no one hears, hoping for help that never comes. But it does not have to be that way. Every time someone answers a call, every time someone reaches out to a stranger, the darkness becomes a little smaller. The cold becomes a little warmer. Seho was quiet for a long moment. And you do this for everyone? He asked. Every species? Every signal? We try, Yuna said. We cannot save everyone. We cannot answer every call. But we keep trying. Because that is what the humans taught us. That is what hope looks like in action. 6 months later, the first Morvith officer joined the crew of the second chance. She was young, barely more than a child by Morvith standards. Her name was Jiwan, and she had been in one of the pods that Minji had saved in the final hours. She had grown up hearing stories of the strangers who had come out of the darkness to rescue her people. Now she stood on the bridge beside Yuna, looking out at the stars with wonder in her eyes. Where do we go next? Jiwan asked. Yuna studied the navigation display. There were always more signals, more calls, more voices crying out in the void. Some were new. Some were ancient. All of them deserved an answer. There is a cluster in the outer rim, Yuna said. An old beacon has been detected. Faint but steady. It has been broadcasting for over 1,000 years. Jiwan's eyes went wide. 1,000 years? That is longer than the Morvith signal. Yes. Do you think anyone is still alive? Yuna thought about her own ship, about the 3,000 years she had spent drifting in the cold. She thought about the moment when a young human removed his helmet and asked if she was okay. I think hope is a strange thing, she said. It survives where nothing else can. And as long as there is even the smallest chance, someone should go and find out. She turned to Bora. Set a course, she ordered. Someone out there is waiting. Let us go answer the knock. The second chance jumped to light speed, and the stars blurred into lines once more. Behind them, they left ripples spreading outward through the galaxy. And ahead of them, in the infinite darkness, countless voices continued to call, waiting for someone to answer, waiting for hope.